But under a system that calls itself meritocratic, and in fact is largely meritocratic in the sense that there's no perverse intentional influence on it, those who succeed think they really deserve it.
Yep.
And they don't, because it has a lot to do with connections, education, opportunities, and so on. And luck.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, the worst part of it is those who don't succeed actually think they deserve it. So the insidiousness of meritocracy is that both sides think they deserve it,
Yeah.
which is utter rubbish.
You were detained under the Internal Security Act, right? This is from the Singapore government press release. He has now given a full account of how he became a Marxist, his pro-communist activities in the US and in Singapore, and how he made use of the Far Eastern Economic Review as a vehicle to promote his pro-communist ideas. Were you, number one, a rebel without a cause, made to believe that you're a rebel with a cause, which is communism? Did you have to say these things, or did you actually do these things? Hi, Kwon Ping.
Hello, nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Wow.
Here's our welcome drink.
Nice, sparkling sake, huh?
Yes, it is.
Wow, very
so
nice.
we have here is the Yamada Nishiki sparkling sake from the Saitama.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers.
Kwon Ping, welcome to Inconvenient Questions. Are you ready?
If they're quite convenient, but if they're too
Conveniently inconvenient.
If they're too inconvenient, I might just have a Biden moment.
Okay, now, you are in your early 70s.
Why do you have to spread this around?
I have to. Because you've got to share with us what your elixir is of youth.
Are you trying to butter me up so that you set me up for the fall?
And then go for the
Yeah, exactly. I'm not that stupid. I'm old enough to
what
know.
is the elixir? Very quickly.
Well, there is no elixir because how can there be an elixir? The idea of an elixir is that you're supposed to look and act a lot younger than your age.
So
I don't. Well,
you do.
Yeah, is that to put me a compliment or basically saying I'm kind of like acting like a kid and not mature? I should be mature enough and so on.
Like a friend of mine said, mutton trying to be lamb. Interesting.
I'm the mutton or the lamb? I'm trying
You're
to
the
figure
mutton.
out.
You're the mutton. Now,
Okay.
there's so much that has happened in your life that, when I was preparing for this interview, I had a problem trying to decide on what to talk about. And I've decided to talk about the one word that you kept using in many of your interviews and in your commentaries, the Lee Kuan Yew School, the S.R. Nathan lectures, and so on. And the word is diversity. It's a word that you've used again and again, and you believe very strongly in diversity. And if I may quote you, and you also use diversity to link it to this term, dynamic meritocracy. I found that very, very interesting. You said this: a fundamental imperative of a dynamic meritocracy is diversity because it strengthens the system, makes it more resilient. It is like biodiversity in the natural world. It is an assurance of survival. Now, do you feel that Singapore still has that diversity in a dynamic sense that you're talking about?
That's an interesting and also somewhat difficult question, because there's many different ways you can look at diversity, right? Do we have still, and obviously we still have the same ethnic diversity we've always had. That hasn't changed substantially. So that's a very positive thing that we have. We have diversity in other ways and so on. But if you're talking about do we have sufficient diversity, not in terms of race, religion, and the standard measures of diversity, but do we have diversity within the context of meritocracy? My argument is some degree, but certainly not enough. And since you're talking about meritocracy, I think I have to talk a little bit more about my view of our problems with with meritocracy, and then about maybe how the notion of diversity within it.
Yeah.
Now, I think, you know, there's been a book that was quite influential called The Tyranny of Meritocracy. And
Michael Sandel.
Michael Sandel, absolutely. It is funny, ironic, that it was actually intended to be a criticism of a particular system.
Yeah.
Now, with that in mind, I think what Singapore has done with meritocracy has elevated it to be a mantra, which in fact has become, in certain ways, quite insidious. Now, with that, though, however, I must first state that meritocracy is somewhat like capitalism.
Yeah.
There is no better alternative to it. Or it's like democracy. It's got capitalism, and democracy has got a lot of things that are not functional about it, but the alternatives are far worse. So if you look at a meritocracy, would you think a autocracy is better, an aristocracy is better, a gerontocracy is better? I would argue certainly not. So in that sense, I don't have any critique of meritocracy as such. It's almost become like a brotherhood at apple pie statement.
Yeah.
My second point would be, I think in terms of structural meritocracy, Singapore has certainly got it. And even in terms of practiced meritocracy, in terms of the structure, we also have it. I'm very happy that we do not allow private schools in Singapore. We have still already some degree of disparity between the good independent schools and your neighborhood schools and so on. But if we had private schools, if we had allowed the Eatons and the Harrows to operate here, we would be far less meritocratic. There are many aspects about Singapore, I think, has preserved the social democratic impulses of the PAP in the early years, as you well know, that has ensured that the meritocracy structurally is still there. You cannot buy your way into anything. Corruption is still very minimal. So all of that I'm not critical about. But at the same time, I think we have now an entrenched meritocracy.
Yeah.
Through nobody's fault, not government's fault, and people have written about it too, that it's entrenched, meaning that, and the statistics show it, the majority of university graduates have parents who are university graduates. The majority of doctors who have parents who are doctors, and so on and so forth.
That's what, 63%?
I don't know the numbers.
You brought it up during your lectures, right?
Yes.
SR not. Those
You
were very
have done your research better than me.
No, those were really interesting, and I think it's useful for us to talk about it because you said 40% of students in the most prestigious primary schools live in HDB, only 40%, right? More than half of PSC scholarship recipients live in private homes, right? 63% of university-educated fathers had children with university degrees, and only 37% of the fathers had of the fathers with secondary education, only 37%.
That was 10 years ago.
That was 10 years ago.
I think it's even gotten more.
It's shifted a bit, and we definitely do much better than many other countries in the world.
Correct.
But that's not the comparison. But that's the point you're making.
No, but my point is not so much statistical.
Yeah.
My point now, and I think Michael Mandel make the same point about the tyranny of meritocracy, is about the psychological impact on both those who don't succeed and those who succeed in a meritocracy.
Yeah.
And that's, the point is, no society is totally meritocratic. If we were in an aristocracy and you were a lord, you maybe pretend that you made it on your own, but in your heart of hearts, you know you were born into it.
Yeah.
If you are a serf born into a feudal society, you might well accept it, but you don't hit yourself on the head and feel it's due to you. You know the system is unfair.
Yeah.
And so either you live with it or you try to change it, but it doesn't matter, you know the system is unfair. But under a system that calls itself meritocratic, and in fact is largely meritocratic in the sense that there's no perverse intentional influence on it, those who succeed think they really deserve it.
Yeah.
And they don't, because it has a lot to do with connections, education, opportunities, and so on. And luck.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, the worst part of it is those who don't succeed actually think they deserve it. Because in a system of meritocracy, the theory is if you didn't make it, the system is fair. So you didn't make it, it's due to you. That lack of self-confidence. So you can imagine if you are in a meritocratic society, if you failed, you never think of rebelling against it because you did it. But if you are a slave in a slave society, you would say, this is inherently so unfair, I'm going to change the system one way or the other. So the insidiousness of meritocracy is that both sides think they deserve it, which is utter rubbish. Both sides, you can attribute some degree of blame to ones who didn't make it, you didn't study hard enough, and so on and so forth. And those who did make it, you can say there is some self-agency involved. But to the extreme part of it is I did it all on my own.
Right.
No parents, no influence, nothing, because this is meritocratic. And you become completely arrogant. Anything.
But what's the implication of this for society?
The implication for Singapore, for our society, is you get a whole generation of people who are arrogant, and because they're the super elites, and worse and more insidious, you get a whole generation of people who basically don't want to do much about their lives, because whatever I didn't get, I actually deserve it. So you become quite passive. You become, like the Chinese say, tang ping, you just lie flat, because basically it's not due to the system being unfair. So why should I do anything? Because it's my fault. And that loss of self-confidence, primarily it's a loss of self-confidence, is bigger than the positive fury of anger. Anger compels people to action. Loss of self-confidence compels you to do nothing, and a very low sense of self-esteem.
And I guess it also leads to a more divided society, a bifurcated society.
Well, you could say it's not so bifurcated, because if you were in a society where it's unjust, it could lead to riots, revolution, revenge, as you get in the French Revolution and so on. You just get a society, and I don't think that would happen in this so-called system what I'm talking about. You get a very passive society. It's not bifurcated as such, because bifurcation can also lead to anger. It's just a self-blame society. And the only thing I can say about it is the inaction and the sense of gloom and the sense of having no purpose in life. The whole thing that I see in passivity, and sometimes I think passivity on the surface seems calm and harmonious, whereas overt injustices lead to conflagrations and anger and so on. So you think a harmonious society is great because on the surface nothing is there. But if that harmonious is due to passivity, then we will always stay a mediocre society. And I've alluded that the biggest danger to Singapore is not blowing up, because I think we've handled our multiracial issues and other things very, very fairly. Singapore society is not full of malcontents ready to break out like in other places. But you end up with passivity. Passivity leads to mediocrity.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this. You come from a wealthy family. You were born into a fairly wealthy family, right? Now, did you at any point feel that you were entitled?
Entitled?
Entitled, in other words, that you feel that you deserve this.
No, but I know that my upbringing allowed me to have access to things that, I grew up in Bangkok. I grew up in a pretty poor, and I wasn't poor, but I grew up in a poor society, which Thailand was. And it would be an utter, I knew it wasn't meritocracy, but I knew I wasn't entitled to it, because I was only living a particular lifestyle because my parents were well off enough to afford it. So I knew I had a privileged upbringing, but I never felt entitled, because it wasn't due to my efforts. It was due to my parents having the wealth.
Yeah, but there was obviously a lot of testosterone in you when you were growing up.
Wow.
Okay,
that's an interesting way of putting it.
Don't let your mind go wild. Don't let your mind go wild.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, really?
When you were doing your NS, you had the reputation of yelling at your officers, and then you were in detention. Yes.
In NS, yes.
NS.
Actually, if you think of that it would be 3 times in detention. Yes.
Oh, and you're so proud of it.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, And then of course you wrote this article when you were a journalist with the Far Eastern Economic Review, FEAR, in 1977, and you were detained under the Internal Security Act, right? Now, that's very interesting, right? This, by the way, is when you were released from detention. This is what said the Internal Security Department detained Kwon Ping, this is from the Singapore government press release, former ex-correspondent for the Far Eastern Economic Review, on March 12, 1977. He has now given a full account of how he became a Marxist, his pro-communist activities in the US and in Singapore, and how he made use of the Far Eastern Economic Review as a vehicle to promote his pro-communist ideas. It gets better. He successfully maneuvered himself into the Far Eastern Economic Review and wrote articles in line with his pro-communist thinking. He admitted using techniques of innuendo, distortion of facts, the highlighting of unfounded rumors, and the disclosure of classified defense information to discredit the Singapore government internationally and to portray the Singapore government as elitist, racialist, fascist, oppressive, and dictatorial. Wow.
Gives me far more credit than I've never seen that, because I was actually under detention. So
I was very impressed.
This guy is pretty. Well, if I had read that, I'd say this guy's a pretty heavy-duty Marxist.
Yeah. You know, so my question to you, is,
who wrote it?
Were you, number one, a rebel without a cause, made to believe that you're a rebel with a cause, which is communism? Did you have to say these things, or did you actually do these things? One would argue that you probably had no choice. If you didn't say these things the way they said it has been said that you said, you would probably still be in incarceration, like the likes of Chia Tai Po, who was there for more than 25 years. So, did you have to make a call?
Yes.
Big question. Did you do those things? Or did you have to say you did those things so that you can get out and lead a normal life?
I'm not so sure that is something I agreed at the time of my release to ever specifically comment on. I have actually said that, and I said it to Mr. Lee himself, that I think
Mr. Lee Kuan Yew.
Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, I think the government detained me erroneously. If you're going to be so specific as to whether I had to do a deal to say something or not, my only comment was you have to judge for yourself. I had to confess on television. I was 24 years old. I confessed to being a communist and this and that. What is a fact, though, is that there were two interviewers. There was Joe Concesio, who was a PAP MP, and there was Peter Lim.
Yeah.
And this is well known, so I can say it, that they asked me questions which they thought would really pin me down. And
Joe Concesio, just for background for the viewers, Joe Concesio was an MP, a PAP MP.
Yes.
And Peter Lim was editor-in-chief of the Straits Times, SPH.
I'm alluding to what I can say openly, and I don't want to say other things.
Sure.
Joe Concesio asked me a question that he thought would show that I was a communist. So he said, would you do this if you're a communist? So I said, yes. Would you do this if you're a communist? Yes, 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 yes. And would you rat on your parents like people had to do in the Cultural Revolution if you're a communist? And apparently, I'm told, and I didn't see a video of myself until I became chairman of MediaCorp.
Okay.
Because I couldn't get access to it.
Yeah.
So apparently I was this young 24-year-old guy, kind of doe-eyed and, very sort of mother's boy kind of thing. And I actually just stared into the camera and said, but I love my parents. So I didn't answer the question.
And that happened?
That happened. That happened. That is the fact.
Okay.
Now, I'm not going to comment then on as to whether I was forced to recant or not forced to recant, because I can't remember the terms of my release. I do not want to violate the terms of my release.
And I mean, some people say that you saw the light after that. And you, from a bad boy without a cause, you became a good boy with a cause.
To be brutally honest, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I was all the time at Stanford and elsewhere. I was an upper middle class kid with what I thought was a cause.
Yeah.
And I think I don't say that I was playing a game. I
No.
deeply believed in the things I believed in. Why I got out of Stanford, thrown out, was because of Shockley talking about,
Vietnam?
No, well, Vietnam was one that I got involved in, but I got thrown out because William Shockley, Nobel Prize winner, was basically advocating the sterilization of black people, and I had some friends in the Black Students' Union, and we
you
disrupted.
protested.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, he actually came to say, Mr. Ho, you shouldn't have protested. If you read page 63 of my book, I say Jews and Chinese are the most intelligent people in the world. So that was stupid me.
Yeah.
No, I do not disavow at all anything that I've said or believed in. And that's why I have no shame or humiliation.
Yeah.
But in detention, and it was solitary confinement, it's really hard on your mind.
Yeah.
Then you start thinking to yourself of the people like, who was it, Chet Tai Po. You think of Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
You think of Aung San Suu Kyi, who's now languishing in jail. And you think of all these people who are ready to give their lives for their cause. And even in Singapore, we had it, the Barisan Socialist people, for whom actually Lee Kuan Yew had enormous respect.
Yeah. You're talking about Operation Cold Store?
Yes, and other people. I mean, he had the perspective that it was he surviving or they surviving.
Yeah.
He put them in jail for many, many years, knowing full well that if they were to come to power, he would have been put in jail. But he was willing to risk his life. These are the people who are willing to risk their lives. And that's when you say, I became a rebel realized I was a rebel without a cause. I thought these were causes, but it's not really a cause. I could choose, if I had not confessed, I would have been staying there for many years, if not 25 years. And that's when I realized that all the professions of all the talk about what I believed in is not really true. I'm not willing to sacrifice my freedom forever. And then you realize who you are. Yeah. You are an upper middle class kid. You were allowed all this leeway, and you're now playing games with people who are not playing games. Yeah. And so I confessed.
It reminds me what you're saying, and thanks for being so honest about it, candid about it. It reminds me of something that Lee Kuan Yew told me in 1985. He said, we were talking about ideologues, He said, there is no room in Singapore for ideologues because they believe so strongly in what they believe in that it'll be an impediment to prosperity and growth. So it's very hard to negotiate. You can't negotiate with someone, and I'm paraphrasing, you can't negotiate with someone who is willing to give up his life for his belief.
Correct.
Right? So there was a certain pragmatic approach to this, and obviously to teach you a lesson. And if you just wear the pragmatic lens, Singapore benefited from you not being incarcerated because you were in a position then to contribute in various capacities. You were founding chairman of Singapore Management University, and you were chairman for over 20 years. And I'm sure the students and the faculty benefited from, I hope they did. You were chairman of MediaCorp. You were also chairman of PUB, or Singapore Power. Yeah. So if you refused to budge, society would not have benefited from.
No. I'm the biggest beneficiary of being
No, you
released.
are. But I think it's both ways. It's symbiotic. It's a larger point, and the point I'd like to go back to the point about diversity. You see, the structural diversity, as you put it just now, is easier to achieve, right? You get everyone to sit for A levels. That those who do well get scholarships and so on and so forth. It's structured, it's formulaic, it works, right? But I think we are now at a stage where structural diversity or meritocracy alone is not going to work. In fact, it could backfire, as you said, right? You need people who have had different experiences in life. That's what I'm driving at.
Absolutely.
I think
But
I mean, I've known you for several years, and what I like about you is that you don't strike me as a rich kid. You don't strike me as a rich kid. You've got good taste, but I think you're willing to stand up for something you believe in, truly believe in, right? And you have a different way of looking at things. That's diversity for me. It's not about gender quotas and things like that. We need to go beyond that.
Yeah.
It's about people who think and act differently. And you've said that we need to change the education system structurally. You had some recommendations.
Yeah.
You want to share some of those?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you like my good taste. I'm the brand ambassador for Uniqlo. This is Uniqlo and Uniqlo and Uniqlo, so that's
Okay, we got to erase that, huh? Okay, because Uniqlo didn't sponsor this. Okay. Okay, so.
But on education, I've actually said quite a number of things on it already. I'm happy that 25 years ago, or more than 25 years ago, I was given the opportunity to put my money where my mouth is, so to speak. And that's also another thing about I think the greatness of LKY.
Yeah.
That he does it not in a very nice way, right? He does it in a kind of offhanded way. He doesn't say to you, "Oh, we need you." He basically, the message I got from him was, "Okay, so you think you're so critical about education system? Okay, I make you chairman of the university. You choose what you can do." You know, but it was a kind of grudging. I've actually asked him before, "Do you think it was right for you to throw me in jail?" No answer, just like that. But then you could see that he would never admit to a mistake, but he has no personal grudges. I wasn't thrown in jail because, like in Malaysia or anywhere where you are a threat to the person, or you are because you are corrupt or you're a political threat or whatever. He deeply believed that I was part of a conspiracy because the Socialist International had thrown Singapore out. So I can understand that. It doesn't justify it in many ways, but I never have borne a grudge because he did it for what he thought was the best of Singapore. And when he thought it was good for Singapore to make me Singapore Power Chairman and this and that, it just shows that that man has no grudge. His mission is to build Singapore. If I think you can do it, you're going to do it. So I've always had a high degree of respect for him for that. In terms of education, the first thing I wanted to change was the notion that young Singaporeans are totally nerds who do really well in exams, academically. They follow the rote system, they have learning by rote, and then when they are graduates and when they are working in the world, they always show a lack of initiative. They can't speak up and articulate things. They do not possess any self-agency and initiative and all the typical things, which was largely true when you compare young Singaporeans to young Americans and young Europeans. They're always very nerdy and so on. And I've always felt insulted by that because being a Singaporean, even though I didn't grow up here, my feeling is that that's always just purely a product of the system. Yeah. Same thing if you criticize Koreans or Chinese or Japanese, it's a system. All people are otherwise fundamentally the same. So SMU was for me a real example to see whether we could prove all these people wrong. And I think we did. We've created a whole generation of young people who are articulate, who can stand up for themselves, who can speak for themselves, and so on. And of course, we were an experiment because we were a small university, and now NTU and NUS have done things that have caused their graduates to also be similar, for which I'm always very happy with, rather than see it as competition. Yeah. So that's one thing they've done. I think they haven't gone fast enough in...
They meaning?
The educational system has not gone far enough in promoting real diversity rather than talking about how, you get ministers talking about how the definition of success should change now, and it should not just be academic success and so on. And I know they're well-meaning, but I do recognize that shifting the educational system is like shifting a very large crude carrier. It's not easy to do. And I'm on good terms with MOE. They invite me for talks and so on, because I do believe that our educational system and the ministry is among the best in the world. Yeah. But that doesn't mean it cannot be improved. And I've also said, I would rather that we have the current problems of being over-technical, over-strong, now needing to sort of soften the edges and soften the definition of success, than to be the other way around, where we're overly soft and trying now to tighten up a bit and trying to produce STEM graduates and so on.
Right.
If we have a problem that is more solvable than on the other side.
Could I ask you a question along these lines, right? More specifically, why is there a need for elite schools? Do we still need elite schools where you need to score a certain level in PSLE, primary school leaving examination, to qualify for the top schools? So, I mean, the top 1% would go to Raffles Institution, Raffles Girls, and so on. You know, I went to Raffles Institution, so I have the license to say, I think we need to scrap it. I think we should have a system where there's a basic cutoff. If you get past PSLE, if you pass PSLE, you can apply to any secondary school. Why is there a need for us to continue to perpetuate this aristocracy of schools? Why?
That I'm not so much in agreement with you, because I'm not so egalitarian to believe that everything should be equal. I do agree with you on certain areas. I think, however, that every school should be allowed to find its own area of excellence. But then every school should have its own criteria.
Yeah.
It may not be the PSLE exam.
Yeah.
It will kind of, I believe in a system where the art still grades, but there is a sorting out process, right? It's not the MOE telling you that if you score this high, you can go to this school. It's more like private schools in the US or UK or anywhere else. You apply, but because so many people apply for 10,000 people apply for 1,000 positions, then obviously, and obviously academics do count. We cannot be so romantic as to say it doesn't count. Then obviously, when a school is in that high demand, then the standards, the cutoff for admission will be a higher standard. So the market, so to speak, sorts itself out, right?
Yep.
But it should not be so rigid. My wife went to a school, Nanhua, that was not like Nanyang, but in those days, I don't know now, they excelled in the performing arts.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who wanted to do performing arts would apply to that school. Now, because it was also a popular school, the grades were generally higher, but it wasn't rigid. So I don't believe in the egalitarianism that all schools will allow, anybody can get anywhere, because it must, the market must be able to settle, so to speak, so that those who excel, not only in grades, you might have a particular school that the elite chess people go to.
Yeah.
The other, so many definitions of academic excellence that I absolutely believe in.
No,
we need more diversity of
Yes.
definition of academic performance.
Yes, and
sure.
and a lot more leeway for schools to like DSA. You know, a lot more of DSA qualified students should be absorbed into the secondary school system. Now,
by the way, I've also advocated that the gifted program is far too one-sided. I do believe that those people who are specially gifted should be able to have avenues, even in secondary school, to pursue the area in which they are gifted.
Yeah.
But our definition of gifted is, at a young age, you're considered to be gifted simply because of your scoring on some areas. I've advocated that we could, in fact, maybe divide Singapore geographically into various clusters, and within various clusters, the schools, the secondary schools, not only the elite ones, the secondary schools can, after a while, begin to say, we are going to develop a certain excellence here and a certain excellence there. So people, students then, who are determined to be gifted, if you're particularly gifted in music, no, you might not necessarily go to that school, but because the school is in that cluster area, you might have a lot of your ECA come from that particular school where the strength is in music. And by the same token, you don't have to have a Singapore sports school as such, which is only for the super elite again. You could have a school in the North Precinct of Singapore, for example, which has decided that they want to go for sports excellence. And then students can be in any school, but they can do ECA there, or they can even transfer transfer to that school if they wanted to. So I do believe that we need to have, and I've called this special needs. Special needs is not only for the people who are handicapped, and gifted is a wrong definition. Special needs just means people who are not within the normal spectrum. It could be people who are artistic on one side of the scale, or people who are gifted in music or sports or anything else. And we must have a system that's diverse enough to really, especially with the wealth of Singapore today, we could have a school system where that diversity, if it's a positive one, can be accelerated. And if that diversity is a disability, it can be mitigated. I'm actually having a talk with a special needs schools in Singapore soon, where at least I'm very glad that we are now recognizing that there's a whole spectrum of people with mild to severe disabilities, and as a society we are rich enough to take care of them also, and not only those who are seen as gifted. So my entire point here is not to be communistic and say that all people are created equal, all people must be suppressed to the lowest common denominator, but all people who are very different from each other, we should enhance everyone's gifts, and we should mitigate everyone's handicaps.
And that's very much what you meant, I believe, by dynamic meritocracy. Right? This is dynamic meritocracy, which, when interfaced with diversity, right, in the truest sense of the word, that is moving away from structural diversity, for example, I think that's the direction that we should take. We've come to the end of the interview, but I'd like to ask you to say something that really, really matters to you about diversity.
But diversity as opposed to meritocracy, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I've actually said that if you look at diversity in the West, diversity in the West has become now a divisive force. It has become fragmented. It's a force of fragmentation. And identities and sub-identities, political, ethnic, social, sexual orientation, has become so divisive that diversity, which is in and of itself a positive value, can actually degenerate into becoming very divisive. So my wish for Singapore is that the things that we've learned about diversity at the macro level, super macro level, which is racial and religious, has not been done, and we go back again to Lee Kuan Yew, it's not been done with a super liberal view. He came down hard on a lot of things, which you would actually be able to say are quite illiberal. The kinds of things you're not allowed to say in the pursuit of freedom of speech on race and religion in the West would be considered crazy. It's all freedom of speech and nothing else. So going forward, and at the same time, we also don't have enough diversity. So we've been able, ironically, to preserve a level of diversity which still allows harmony, but in certain areas we could be more diverse. But we haven't seen that diversity in other areas, in boardrooms, for example, or in schools, can be enhanced. So a deep, comprehensive, humble understanding of what diversity means to Singapore, what it has done for us, but at the same time, what we should do going forward so that we do not degenerate, I think that's the important task for Singapore today.
Kwon Ping, thank you.
Thank you.